In the fourth chapter of the book of Ruth, the story of Ruth is at this point where Boaz is getting ready to want to marry Ruth. But in order for him to do that, things have to be cleared legally, and so that the people can follow the law. In Ruth, the fourth chapter, beginning in verse 1, it says, "Now Boaz had gone up to the gate and sat down there, and behold, the Redeemer of whom Boaz had spoken came by. So Boaz said, 'Turn aside, friend, sit down here.' And he turned him aside and sat down. And he took 10 of the elders of the city and said, 'Sit down here.' So they sat down. Then he said to the Redeemer, 'Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, is selling a parcel of land that belonged to her relative Elimelech. So I thought I would tell you of it and say, buy it in the presence of those who are sitting here, and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not, tell me that I may know. For there is no one besides you to redeem it, and then I come after you.'" I'm just going to stop there because I'm not trying to get into the story of Boaz and Ruth. But it's interesting in this passage that when Boaz needs to make sure all the legal things are clear for him to marry Ruth, he does it in front of, with the elders of the city. Who are these elders of Israel? What did they do? What was their purpose in God's plan for the guidance and the help of the people? And is there any application from the elders of Israel to the elders that should exist in churches today? Can we learn anything from these elders that helps us to understand the role of elders in the churches today? So we're going to take this week, and we'll probably do another lesson sometime soon, to talk about the role of these elders of Israel. I had intended that it would be just one lesson, but you know how I did. So this is going to be 2 lessons. We really don't have a lot to help us understand the origin of the elders of Israel. Nothing is mentioned about the elders of Israel prior to the time that they were in the land of Egypt. And that's probably understandable. When the people of Israel went into Egypt, who was it? It was Jacob and his family. And so, who was in charge? Jacob. And of course, he had his sons with him, but literally, Jacob was in charge. By the time the book of Exodus begins, if you want to turn there with me, Exodus, the 3rd chapter is where we'll be. By the time Exodus begins, we estimate that the people of Israel at this point are probably a couple of million people. And so there's a change that has taken place. In Exodus, the 3rd chapter, and in verse 16, when Moses is before the burning bush, and God is telling him that he needs to go to talk to the Pharaoh, he actually sends Moses first to the elders of the people of Israel. He says there in Exodus 3 and in verse 16, "Go and gather the elders of Israel together, and say to them, Jehovah, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and of Jacob, has appeared to me, saying, I have observed you and what has been done to you in Egypt." So Moses, I guess probably contrary to what we sometimes think from movies and things like that, he doesn't go directly to the Pharaoh. He goes directly to the elders of Israel. And as far as I can tell, this is the first mention that I see of the elders of Israel, and there they are. And we really don't know anything about them in that sense. Just a couple of verses down, in verse 18, it says that a part of what he's supposed to do when he goes to see Pharaoh is that he takes the elders along with him. He says, "And they will listen to your voice, and you and the elders of Israel shall go to the king of Egypt and say to him, Jehovah, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us, and now please let us go on a 3-day journey to the wilderness that we may sacrifice to our God." So Moses was actually accompanied by the elders. And this tells us that obviously the people looked to the elders and understood that they had an important role in the leadership for the people of Israel and the guidance and the decisions that were being made. And of course, we read in the 4th chapter of Exodus that this is exactly what Moses and Aaron did. By the 12th chapter of the book of Exodus, we have another indication of an important part of this. Now, the 12th chapter of the book of Exodus, all the plagues have been done except for the last one. And God is establishing the rules for the Passover and what is to happen at the Passover so that the people can be saved. And he tells them in verse 21, Exodus 12 and in verse 21, he gives the role of a leadership role in choosing the lamb to the elders of Israel. Then Moses called all the elders of Israel and said to them, "Go and select lambs for yourselves according to your clans, and kill the Passover lamb." And he goes on with the other instruction that is given for that. But now we have an interesting thought, because now we see the elders are not just involved in telling the people, making leadership role, but leadership even in religious sense of what they're doing. They are choosing the Passover lamb and doing the things that are necessary for them to be saved. And that's interesting. Now, if you go to Exodus, the 18th chapter, and this is the passage that we'll be focusing more than any other this morning. The passage that was read a little bit earlier by Earl. That Moses and the people are gathered around Mount Sinai, and Moses is spending apparently a lot of his time judging the people of Israel. That whenever there's a dispute between two people, they come and they bring it to Moses. And apparently Moses was standing around all day doing that, and the people were standing all day waiting for their turn. And Jethro, his father-in-law, said, this is going to kill you and them if you keep this up. And so he made a suggestion about what he should do. In verse 20, he reminds him, "You teach them about the laws. You shall warn them about the statutes and the laws and make them know the way in which they must walk and what they must do." So he reminds Moses, you do the job of teaching. And then he says in verse 21, "Moreover, look for able men from all the people, men who fear God, who are trustworthy and hate a bribe, and place such men over the people as chiefs of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, and of tens." Now I know here that the men are not called elders by Jethro. He used the word chiefs or rulers. So it's not the same rule, but obviously there's a division of power. After Earl had read this, my dad was sitting right up here and he leaned back and he said, "This was man's wisdom. This wasn't a command from God." And he's exactly right. This was Jethro, the father-in-law, who was telling him to do this. But one of the great things is, I was ready for this. I know how my dad thinks. He says, near the end of this passage, in verse 23, "If you do this, God will direct you. You'll be able to endure." So even Jethro looks to it and says that this should be done through God and do it God's way. And Moses, we're told in verse 24, listened to it, and that means not only did he listen to Jethro, but I think he had the approval of God in making this choice for what would be done. So here we have men who are chosen to help in making the judgments, the decisions between various groups of people, between thousands, hundreds, fifties, and even tens that are involved. In Numbers, the 11th chapter, the people of Israel have been complaining again at this point, but God has a specific call for certain men. We're going to read the beginning of verse 16. "Then Jehovah said to Moses, 'Gather for me 70 men of the elders of Israel, whom you know to be the elders of the people, and officers over them, and bring them to the tent of meeting, and let them take their stand with you. And I will come down and talk with you there, and I will take some of the spirit that is on you, and put it on them, and they shall burden the people of the people with you, so that you may not bear it yourself alone.'" So now we have another picture of an even more refining of for who these elders or these men are to be. God says, choose 70 men. Out of all the men who have been chosen already as elders, choose 70 to be the ones who help you bear with these things. There's a part of me that I really appreciate in this passage in verse 17 when he says, I'm going to take some of my spirit and put it on them. These men were not going to be just using their own wisdom to be helping guide the people of Israel. They had God's help in that. If you look down in verse 24, this is exactly what he did. So Moses went out and told the people the words of Jehovah, and he gathered 70 men of the elders of the people and placed them around the tent. Then Jehovah came in the cloud and spoke to him and took some of the spirit that was on him and put it on the 70 elders. And as soon as the spirit rested on them, they prophesied, but they did not continue doing it. So, at this point, this is about all that we learn about the elders of Israel, except that we now have kind of a special group of the 70. And this group, we'll see mentioned over and over again, the elders of Israel, is as we go through the Old Testament, even to the time of Christ, they still have a role. Many people associate these 70 elders with the Sanhedrin at the time of Christ. But the men who were chosen for that council in Jerusalem were trying to follow the same pattern that we have established here. Understand that that's just kind of the thought. But what I'd really like to talk about this morning, if you go back to Exodus 18, is the passage that talks about the character of these elders of Israel. And to me, I know that there's almost nothing here, so I'm making a mountain out of a molehill, but this is really the only place where we have anything in the Old Testament that talks about who these men are to be. And I do find this to be very instructive. Now we begin, of course, with the term elder itself. An elder implies what? They're old, right? Maybe mature. Is that the right way to say it? and that's part of the assumption of it. This word elder is actually used in two ways. One of just a man that's old, but also of a person who is a leader in the community, that they have some special role. And obviously, being elder, it's not just saying that they're an old man, but there's a connotation of maturity and experience that this man has, of dignity and honor, perhaps even authority that's recognized, and the wisdom that's come within his life. In Exodus 18, verse 21, the wisdom of Jethro gave 4 characteristics for these men. Moreover, look for able men from all the people, men who fear God, who are trustworthy and hate a bribe, and place such men over the people. So the first thing he says is, you need a man who is able. And this is an interesting term, to say the least. It's a word that means strength, ability, even wealth. Some places it's used to speak of an army. When it talks later about David's mighty men of valor, this is the word that it's talking about. Because it's using it in that sense as his strength as a warrior, but also his role as a protector of the people. So it's almost, when I see the mighty men of valor, I think of our very idealized views of knights in the Middle Ages, which is probably not true, but we've romanticized it to a certain extent. And that's the kind of men these are, men of station. And the idea of this word is basically, it speaks of strength and of influence. Let's turn to the book of Genesis. Just a couple of chapters back in Genesis 47. In Genesis 47, Joseph is getting permission from the Pharaoh to bring his family into the land of Egypt. And the Pharaoh is giving instruction about where they are to live. In Genesis 47 and verse 6, it says, the land of Egypt is before you. Settle your father and your brothers in the best of the land. Let them settle in the land of Goshen. And if you know any able men among them, put them in charge of my flock. So you notice there, he says, if you know any able men. put them in charge of my flock. What kind of man does Pharaoh want caring for his flock? Was it just to be any guy who knew something about sheep? It was someone who had shown himself to be good with sheep, who knows sheep, who knows the problems that sheep face, who knows about the diseases of sheep, who knows how to take care of it, knows the solutions. Someone who not only knows all that stuff, but by experience has demonstrated he can do it, and he will do what's necessary. I think all of that's involved. When he's saying, I want an able man, he's saying, I need someone who's excellent at taking care of these things. That's the kind of man he was looking for, that man who's able to do it. So, when Jethro tells Moses, choose an able man, what is he saying? That you need to be an able man. That person needs to know what needs to be done. They need to be the kind of man who can do what needs to be done. And I think that means the strength in body to do it, but more importantly, the strength in mind, in determination, in wisdom, in experience. They need to be courageous men who are not afraid to act, to do what must be done, even when it might be unpleasant or difficult. And these are men who have demonstrated that not just in theory, but they've done it through their lives. These are the able men. This is a big and all-encompassing word that he's using here. And depending on how you look at the list, the next three things may be expanding the idea of what an able man is, or this may be, that may be four separate. But either way, we're getting a picture here of what kind of a person. We're getting a person who knows and can do what needs to be done. Okay. The second one that he mentions is that these men are to fear God. Now, you and I both know fearing God is one of those terms that sometimes we struggle with. Fear implies very often being afraid of something. Very often that's true and intended. But we also know it also has the idea of respect and paying respect and honor to one who is doing it. Turn with me to Exodus the 20th chapter and verse 20. Exodus the 20th chapter and verse 20 is where the people of Israel are gathered around Mount Sinai to receive the law. In fact, this verse comes right after they've received the law. But to recall what happened before this is that when they arrived at Mount Sinai, when God came down, the mountain was shaking, and there was smoke, and there was lightning, and there was loud noises, and the people were terrified. And that's the right word. They were terrified. They were trembling because of hearing the voice of God. And in fact, the verse just prior to this, where they've heard the voice of God, the people have said, "You go speak to God. We don't want to hear that again." And so Moses says these words. Moses said to the people, "Do not fear, for God has come to test you, that the fear of him may be before you, that you may not sin." Now, I don't know about you, but isn't this an interesting passage where he says, "Do not fear, that the fear of God may be upon you"? And it's clear in this passage that the word fear is being used in two very different ways. The first fear is obviously that they were afraid because of the physical manifestations they saw at Mount Sinai. They were fearful for their lives and for their well-being. Whereas the other fear he speaks of is the fear of God, is the respect and the reverence that they would follow his law. Martin Luther actually has a great way, I think, of distinguishing between these two kinds of fear of God. He describes the first way of fearing God, the way that we often think of it, as servile fear. And what he means by servile is the kind of fear that a servant has, especially with a harsh master, that servant is afraid of displeasing because of the negative consequences that would happen to him. So he's motivated to prevent bad things from happening. So that's one kind of bad fear. He calls the other kind of fear, it's truly fear still, but he called it filial, which means family fear. So this is where, because of the love of a son for his parent, He respects and honors the Father. He loves the Father. He wants to please the Father. And so the fear is a fear of disappointing the Father and failing to do what the one who loves me and who cares for me and provides for me wants me to do. I find that a really helpful distinction. You? That idea that I want to, because I love and because my aim is to please him, I'm going to submit to his will as I should. I think we see that in this passage. That's what God wants of us, is that we be his children and that we serve him and we're careful to do what he wants us to do because we want to please him. I think we see that in the book of Deuteronomy, the 10th chapter. Deuteronomy, the 10th chapter, beginning at verse 12. And now, Israel, what does Jehovah your God require of you but to fear Jehovah your God, to walk in all his ways, to love him, to serve Jehovah your God with all your heart and with all your soul, and to keep the commandments and the statutes of Jehovah, which I am commanding you today for your good. So, what does God require of you? It starts the very first with, fear him. But that provides the basis then for, I think, everything that follows, don't you? Because I fear God, therefore I walk in his ways. Therefore I love him. Therefore I serve him with all my heart and with all my soul. And I understand that the rules that he's given me, I keep the commandments because I know he gave them to me for my good. They're not just given capriciously, God saying, well, you can do this, you can't do that. It's not just God, doing that. He gave these commandments for the good of the Israelites. It begins with the fear of God. So someone who fears God is going to keep the commandments. He's going to follow after God from his whole heart and do what God wants him to do. Of course, there's a famous passage in Proverbs 1, verse 7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. To really understand God and who he is, you have to start with understanding our relationship to him. But I think my favorite one that helps with this actually comes from David. Turn with me to Psalm 34. In Psalm 34, we're going to start reading in verse 11. David writes this: Come, O children, listen to me. I will teach you the fear of Jehovah. So here David addresses his people, and maybe this is really God. I'm going to teach you what it means to truly fear Jehovah. Verse 12. What man is there who desires life, who loves many days that he may see good? Keep your tongue from evil and your lips from speaking deceit. Turn away from evil and do good. Seek peace and pursue it. That's an astonishingly simple and surprising definition, isn't it, of what it means to fear Jehovah? Watch what you say. Don't lie. Don't do bad things. Do good things. Seek peace. But where's the basis for all that? I think these are all practical understandings of what it means to fear God. That the fear of God changes my life and how I interact with other people and how I choose what I should do in my life. So this quality of this man who fears God is one who understands who God is, who understands God's law, because that's the beginning of wisdom and knowledge, and has a determination to keep God's law from the heart. And so the man who fears good is the one who's going to be doing good. The one who fears God is the one who's going to be doing good and turning away from evil in every aspect of his life. The next trait that's mentioned in Exodus, the 18th chapter, verse 21, my translation uses the word that this man is to be trustworthy. Many of the translations use the expression men of truth. They are to be men of truth. And I like that in a lot of ways. The word that's being used here that the modern translations tend to like trustworthy is the word that's often translated truth. And it means something that's firm, that's faithful, that's stable, that's reliable. There's a basic idea of a sense of certainty. So to walk in the truth is to conduct yourself according to the standard that God has given. And a person who does that and does that reliably is trustworthy in that sense. There are several people in the scriptures who are described this way. In 1 Kings, the second chapter, verse 4, when David is recalling the promise that was made to him for his sons, is that if his sons remained walked before God in faithfulness, there would always be someone on the throne. The unfortunate part of the story is, of course, they didn't, but that was the condition. They not go after idols. They follow God's law, that they do those things that are right. In 1 Kings, the 3rd chapter, verse 6, Solomon speaks of this as referring back to his father, that David was a man who walked in faithfulness before you. That's who David was. In Psalm 86, we have David's prayer. Psalm 86 and verse 11, David says, "Teach me your way, O Jehovah, that I may walk in your truth. Unite my heart to fear your name." One of the things I like about this is, one, we have a combination now here of two of the traits that we've talked about so far. Walking in truth and fearing God's name. I choose to live in the right way, and therefore I follow after that which is true. But I also like to unite my heart. That's a powerful phrase. And I think that's one of the struggles that most of us have, is that ultimately our hearts are divided. We allow our hearts to be divided by our careers or our families or the things that we find pleasure in. Instead of being united toward God, often our hearts are divided between a bunch of different things. And he says, unite my heart to fear your name. I can walk in your truth. So there's the truth that we need to follow. The other person that uses this, actually, Hezekiah, and this one always, if you're not careful, sounds kind of arrogant, but in Isaiah 38 and verse 3, Hezekiah has been told by God that he's about to die, and he is to prepare himself for that. And he goes to his bed and he begins to pray to God. And as his prayer goes on, he says, "Please, O Lord, remember how I've walked before you in faithfulness with a whole heart and have done what is good in your sight." And Hezekiah wept bitterly. Hezekiah says, "I've walked before you in this faithfulness." So what kind of man is Jethro advising Moses to choose? He's telling him to choose a man who knows the truth, who lives according to the truth, a man who can be depended on to do what's right according to God's standards, no matter what the circumstances are. That he is guided by that truth. And so there's a sense of trustworthiness, there's a sense of certainty in that man. The fourth one is that this man hates a bribe. At least that's what my translation, the translations are all over the place on this one. Some say he hates dishonest gain, or hates unjust gain, or hates covetousness. And one reading says hates pride, and I'm not sure exactly where that comes from. But the idea in this passage is that this man is to not be motivated in his activities by personal gain. That's not the first thing. And so often today, we see that's the problem for so many people. They're motivated by what can I get out of it. And that becomes the ruling guide for their life. And it obscures their duty, honesty, the rights of others. What they care about is what they get out of it. And that seems to be the idea behind hating a bribe. It's not just that they can be bribed, but that they're always looking for that advantage. And this is a great temptation for leaders and for those who would judge the people, because people are always willing, in order for them to get advantage, they'll do what needs to be done. And if he's willing to take a bribe or to gain things, he can actually turn away from justice and what is right just in order to make that gain. That often in Israel's history led to great disasters. I think of Eli's sons, and I think of Samuel's sons. who were motivated by their own desires. And it was because, in particular, because of Samuel's son's wickedness, that the people cried out for a king and turned away from God and what he wanted. In Ezekiel, the 22nd chapter, verse 27, comes this condemnation. Her princes and her midst are like wolves tearing the prey, shedding blood, destroying lives to get dishonest gain. And that uses that same expression, dishonest gain, is the same expression that we're looking at. What are God's leaders? What were the leaders of the people doing? They were the wolves in the midst of sheep. And they were using the sheep for their own benefit and destroying the sheep in the process because they were thinking only of themselves in those things. So what kind of man is Jethro trying to say here? A man who's not just thinking about what he can get out of it. You know, the scriptures, and Paul reminds us in 1 Timothy 6 that the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. And the desire to be rich is where many of us begin to fall. It's a great stumbling block. One who loves money, one who's always looking for personal gain, can easily be swayed from righteousness and truth. And so we have to be careful with that. So when we look at these four character traits, what is an elder supposed to be? An elder of Israel was a man who had demonstrated by his life that he can reasonably and efficiently deal with people and the various struggles they have with their faith. Their character is rooted in a fear of God and in a loyalty to the truth, so that they can be relied upon to do what is correct in all circumstances. And he's not going to be swayed from that faithfulness either to God, to God's people, or to righteousness by the desire for personal gain. And that's kind of my synthesis of what he's saying. Now, the next question is, can this be transferred over in thinking about what this teaches about the character of elders in the church? And I'm not going to go to these passages. Most of us are familiar with them. But in two passages, in 1 Timothy, the 3rd chapter, verses 1 through 7, and Titus, the 1st chapter, verses 5 through 9, are the passages that list all the character traits, the qualities that are necessary in an elder. And so, when you put them up next, is there any correlation? Yeah. The elders for Israel, the list is really short. We've got two fairly long but similar lists. But I found it interesting that, in some cases, these qualities are demonstrating that a man is able to do this job. He's the husband of one wife. He's shown he can maintain the faithfulness in that relationship. He's managed his household well. His children are faithful. Those are the kind of things that show he's able to do that. But even in saying, some of these were really difficult to decide if it fit or not. I may be pushing this whole thing. I hope you understand that I'm not completely wedded to this. But when it says he's not violent but gentle, doesn't that show a man who's capable of dealing with a difficult situation and doing it in the right way? It made me think of David in the situation with Nabal, where David's first reaction to the rejection was in anger. He was ready to go kill that guy for not being willing to share with him and his men. As David grew in wisdom, that changed, so that even when he was fleeing from Jerusalem because of his son Absalom trying to take over, when Shimei, one of Saul's cousins or something like that, was cursing at him, David's reaction at that time was to tell the men who wanted to go kill him, don't do it. David had grown, he had changed. He learned what it meant to be not violent but gentle. He was a capable man. He knew the right situation. We see that the elders are to fear God. And by that, I see the right character. They're hospitable, they're not drunkards, they're not arrogant. And Timothy especially speaks of them being lovers of good and upright and holy and disciplined. They are to be trustworthy, that is, men of truth, Men of truth means you have to be able to teach. You have to not be a recent convert. You have to be really have it embedded in you. And especially, again, in Titus, hold firm to the word that they can rebuke and they can convict those who are in sin. Titus makes it very clear that that's part of the work. And that they hate a bribe. And we see that in both Timothy and Titus, not our love of money and not our greed for gain. So there's a part of me that, while this isn't conclusive or perfect, it's at least interesting to me that the role of elders in the Israel and the role of elders in the church are not dissimilar. But we have a lot more information about the elders in the church, don't we? And I think that is significant. That it is clearly defined because maybe the guidance that they may have had at that time, that Moses and others had, we don't have. We have the scriptures. And in some ways, it's more vital. We have the clarity of God's word for us, so that we have the right men for the job. And just being old is not enough. It needs to be more than that. So, after all that stuff, whether male or female here today, isn't it one of the interesting things about this is that it's clear the kind of people God wants each of us to be? Aren't these four things the kind of things that God desires for each of us? That we are able, that we're ready to do what God desires to be done, and we depend upon His strength to do it. That we fear God, knowing who He is, knowing His law, doing that which is good. That we're men of truth, that we follow after the standard of our lives in God's word, that we're reliable, that people know who we are and what we're going to do, and we hate a bribe. Beware of covetousness. That we don't get caught up in the materialism of the world that so easily distracts us from serving God. These four things, they're useful things for us to think about in our own lives. Am I this kind of person? I think that's true whether male or female, don't you? Are you the kind of person who God would approve of in this way? So I know that in some ways this is kind of like a historical lesson and setting this up for further application, but there's good application for you today. We want to offer an opportunity this morning for anyone who's not a Christian to become one. If you believe that Jesus is the Christ and you're ready to be baptized so that your sins can be washed away, would you please come forward as we stand and sing? Jesus, the loving shepherd.